The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, cutting through my dorm room like a blade. I remember staring at the unknown number, my heart already racing because nothing good ever comes from calls at that hour. When I answered, a tired voice said, "Is this Sophia Chen? We're calling from Riverside General Hospital. Your mother has been in a serious accident." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sophia, and I was 19 when I learned that sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones orchestrating your exclusion from the most important moments of your life. I was a sophomore at Portland State University, 3 hours away from my hometown of Salem, Oregon, when that call changed everything I thought I knew about my family. The confusion started immediately. "I'm sorry," I said, sitting up in my narrow dorm bed, my roommate Kaya stirring in the darkness. "There must be some mistake. I'm not listed as her emergency contact." The nurse, who introduced herself as Linda, paused for a moment. "According to our records, you were listed as the primary contact under daughter. Your stepfather's sister was listed second, but we couldn't reach her." That's when it hit me. Derek, my stepfather of 4 years, had been slowly erasing me from my mother's life in ways I was only beginning to understand. He must have changed Mom's emergency contacts without telling either of us, listing his sister Pamela first and me second. But in his arrogance, he'd given them Pamela's old phone number, the one she'd changed 6 months ago when she moved to Phoenix. I threw on clothes while Linda explained that Mom had been in a head-on collision on Highway 22. The other driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. Mom was unconscious with a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding. They were prepping her for emergency surgery. "How long until you can get here?" Linda asked. "I'm leaving now," I said, already grabbing my keys. The 3-hour drive to Salem felt eternal. I called Derek 17 times. Every single call went straight to voicemail. His phone wasn't dead, he was ignoring me. At first, I thought maybe he was at the hospital and couldn't answer. But as mile after mile passed on the empty interstate, a darker realization began to form. Derek had always resented my relationship with Mom. From the moment he married her when I was 15, he'd been working to create distance between us. It started small. He'd schedule family activities on weekends when he knew I was supposed to visit. He'd suggest Mom take weekend trips with him during my school breaks. When I got accepted to college, he convinced her I needed to be independent and shouldn't come home every weekend like I'd planned. "Sophia needs to grow up," he'd say with that patronizing smile. "You're enabling her dependence by making her feel welcome here all the time." But this was different. This wasn't about forcing independence. This was about ensuring I wouldn't be called when something happened to the most important person in my life. I realized Derek had been planning for moments like this, where he could control who was present during my mother's most vulnerable times. I arrived at Riverside General at 6:15 a.m., my eyes burning from crying and exhaustion. The ICU waiting room was empty except for a security guard and a cleaning lady mopping the floors. Linda, the nurse who'd called me, looked surprised to see me. "You made good time," she said gently. "Your mother is out of surgery. The internal bleeding was more extensive than we initially thought, but Dr. Martinez was able to repair the damage. She's stable now, but still unconscious." "Where's my stepfather?" I asked. Linda checked her charts. "We haven't been able to reach any other family members. You're the first to arrive." The weight of that statement settled on my chest like concrete. Derek lived 20 minutes from this hospital. He should have been here hours ago. Unless he'd never received the call because he'd made sure he wouldn't. Linda led me to Mom's room. Seeing her lying there, pale and connected to machines, with bandages covering half her face, broke something inside me. I pulled a chair next to her bed and took her hand. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light, and I felt a surge of anger. She'd married Derek because she thought he would be a partner, someone who would help her navigate life's challenges. Instead, he'd systematically isolated her from the person who loved her most. Around 8 a.m., I called Derek again. This time, he answered. On the first ring. "Sophia, why are you calling so early?" His voice was casual, like he was answering a routine check-in call. "Derek, Mom's been in a car accident. She's in the ICU at Riverside General." The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't surprise. It was calculation. "Oh my God," he said, but his tone was off. "When did this happen? Why wasn't I called?" "It happened around midnight. The hospital tried to reach Pamela first, but they had her old number. So they called me." Another pause. "Well, I'll be right there. Don't make any medical decisions until I arrive. I'm her husband. I have the authority here." That last statement sent chills down my spine. Medical authority. That's what this had all been about. Derek wasn't just trying to exclude me from family activities or reduce my visits home. He was positioning himself to have complete control over my mother's life, including decisions about her health and well-being without any interference from me. 45 minutes later, Derek arrived with Pamela in tow. They walked into Mom's ICU room like they owned the place. Derek kissed Mom's forehead and immediately started asking the nurse detailed questions about her condition, insurance coverage, and treatment options. He was playing the part of the devoted, concerned husband perfectly. But I noticed he wouldn't look at me directly. Pamela, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s who'd never liked me, gave me a dismissive glance. "Sophia, you look terrible. When's the last time you slept? Maybe you should go back to school and let the adults handle this." Derek nodded in agreement. "She's right. There's nothing you can do here, and you have classes. Your mother wouldn't want you falling behind in your studies." They were trying to send me away. 24 hours after my mother nearly died, they were attempting to exclude me from her bedside. I looked at Mom, still unconscious, still fighting, and made a decision that would change everything. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "I'm her daughter. I belong here." Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think it's time we discuss some changes that need to happen in this family." Derek's words hung in the sterile hospital air like a threat.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I felt my stomach drop as he exchanged a meaningful look with Pamela. "What kind of changes?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. "Well," Derek said, settling into the chair on the opposite side of Mom's bed, "your mother and I have been discussing your future. We think it's time you became more self-sufficient. This whole running home every time there's a problem isn't healthy for anyone involved." I stared at him in disbelief. "Mom is unconscious. She's been unconscious for 8 hours. When exactly did you two have this conversation?" Pamela stepped forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Sophia, honey, your mother has expressed concerns about your dependence on her. She feels guilty that you're not forming proper adult relationships because you're always running back to Mommy." The manipulation was so blatant it took my breath away. Mom had never said anything remotely close to that. In fact, she'd been the one encouraging me to come home more often, worried that Derek's suggestions were pushing me away. "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Mom would never say that." Derek leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Sophia, I know this is hard to hear, but your mother has been trying to find a gentle way to create some boundaries. The emergency contact situation was actually her idea. She thought if you weren't the first person called for every little thing, you'd be forced to focus on your own life." I wanted to scream. The audacity of using Mom's unconscious state to rewrite history was breathtaking. But I forced myself to stay calm. Getting emotional would only reinforce their narrative that I was too immature to handle adult situations. "If that's true," I said carefully, "then why did she list me as the primary contact? Why was your sister listed with an old phone number?" For the first time, Derek looked uncomfortable. That was an oversight. Pamela forgot to update her contact information. "Forgot for 6 months?" I pressed. "Even after Mom specifically asked her for the new number at Christmas?" I could see Derek's jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by me. In his mind, I was supposed to be the compliant stepdaughter who accepted whatever narrative he constructed. "Sophia, I think you're overwrought. This isn't the time or place for these accusations." That's when Dr. Martinez walked in, a kind-faced woman in her 40s who immediately sensed the tension in the room. "Good morning, everyone. I wanted to update you on Mrs. Chen's condition." She glanced at Derek. "You must be the husband." "Derek Whitman," he said, standing to shake her hand. "This is my sister Pamela, and that's my stepdaughter Sophia." The way he said stepdaughter made it sound like I was barely related to the patient. Dr. Martinez looked at me with warm eyes. "You're the one who answered our call this morning. Thank you for getting here so quickly. Your mother is lucky to have such a dedicated daughter." Derek stepped forward. "Doctor, I need to discuss some concerns about medical decision-making. As her husband, I obviously have the legal authority to make choices about her treatment, but I want to make sure everyone understands the chain of command here." My heart started racing. This was it. This was Derek's play. He was going to try to exclude me from any decisions about Mom's care. Dr. Martinez looked puzzled. Of course, immediate family members are always included in care discussions. We typically involve spouses, children, and other close family members in treatment planning. Well, that's what I wanted to clarify. Sophia is away at college, and we don't want to burden her with difficult medical decisions. She's got her whole life ahead of her. These kinds of stressful situations can really impact a young person's mental health and academic performance. Pamela nodded vigorously. "We're just looking out for her best interests. Sometimes the kindest thing is to shield young people from trauma they're not equipped to handle." I felt like I was watching a carefully rehearsed performance. They'd obviously discussed this strategy before arriving at the hospital. Dr. Martinez, however, seemed less convinced. "That's thoughtful of you. But ultimately, these decisions should involve everyone who cares about the patient." Mrs. Chen listed her daughter as the primary emergency contact, which suggests she wants her involved in medical situations. Derek's mask slipped again, just for a second. "Actually, that was an old form. We've been meaning to update it. Sophia is very busy with school, and we didn't want to worry her unnecessarily with every medical issue." "This is hardly every medical issue," I said, finding my voice again. "This is a life-threatening car accident, and I'm not too busy or too fragile to be involved in decisions about my mother's health." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of Mom's monitors. Dr. Martinez looked between us, clearly recognizing that something deeper was happening here than a simple family discussion about medical logistics. "Perhaps we should focus on Mrs. Chen's immediate care needs right now. She's stable, but we'll be monitoring her closely for the next 48 hours. The head trauma is our primary concern." After Dr. Martinez left, Derek's demeanor shifted completely. Gone was the concerned husband act. His voice became cold and calculating. "Sophia, I think it's time you and I had an honest conversation about your place in this family." I looked at Mom, still unconscious, still vulnerable, and felt a surge of protective rage. My place in this family? I'm her daughter. I've been her daughter for 19 years. You've been her husband for 4. Pamela scoffed. "Biology doesn't automatically make you more important than the man who's actually taking care of her day to day." "Taking care of her?" I shot back. "You mean isolating her from me? Convincing her I don't want to visit? Making her feel guilty every time she tries to maintain our relationship?" Derek stood up abruptly, his 6'2" frame towering over me in the small hospital room. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I've been nothing but supportive of your mother's relationship with you, but I won't stand by and watch you manipulate her guilt to avoid growing up and becoming independent." "Manipulate her guilt?" I was incredulous. "I'm in college 3 hours away. I call twice a week and visit once a month. How is that manipulation?" "Because," Derek said, his voice rising, "every time you call crying about some problem at school or show up here expecting her to fix your life, you're making it impossible for her to move forward. She can't build a new life with me when she's constantly worried about managing your emotions." I felt like I'd been slapped. The cruelest part was that there was a grain of truth in what he was saying. I had called Mom when I was struggling with classes. I had come home when I felt overwhelmed or lonely. But that's what mothers and daughters do for each other. That's what love looks like. I never asked her to choose between us, I said quietly. But you're forcing her, Pamela interjected. Every time you show up here with your problems, every time you act like you need her more than Derek does, you're making her choose, and it's not fair to any of us. I looked at Mom's still face, at the bruises and bandages, at the machines keeping her stable, and something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't really about medical decisions or emergency contacts, or even my relationship with Mom. This was about control. Derek had married my mother, but he'd never been able to fully possess her because I was always there, representing her life before him, her unconditional love for someone who wasn't him, her identity as a mother rather than just his wife. The emergency contact change wasn't an oversight or even a deliberate snub. It was a test run. Derek was experimenting with what would happen if I was removed from the equation entirely. How long would it take for Mom to stop asking about me? How easily could he rewrite our family history once I wasn't there to contradict his version of events? I sat back down next to Mom's bed and took her hand. Her skin was warm, and I could feel her pulse under my fingertips. Steady, strong, fighting. I'm not going anywhere, I said, looking directly at Derek. Whatever game you're playing, whatever you're trying to prove, it stops now. She's my mother, and I love her, and I'm going to be here for every decision, update, and every step of her recovery. Derek's face darkened. We'll see about that. Derek's threat lingered in the air as he and Pamela left the room, claiming they needed to handle insurance paperwork. I knew they were strategizing, planning their next move to push me out of Mom's life. But I wasn't the same naive 19-year-old who had driven down here in panic just hours ago. Sitting beside Mom's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, I realized I needed to document everything that was happening. I pulled out my phone and started recording voice memos, speaking quietly so the nurses wouldn't overhear. I detailed every conversation, every manipulation tactic, every attempt to exclude me from medical decisions. I saved the screenshots of my call log, showing 17 unanswered calls to Derek. I photographed the medical bracelet on Mom's wrist that still listed me as her emergency contact, despite Derek's claims that this was outdated information. Linda, the nurse who had called me, returned to check Mom's vitals. She seemed troubled by something and kept glancing toward the door where Derek and Pamela had exited. "Honey," she said quietly, "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of family dynamics. Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, sensing she had noticed the tension in the room. "When I called you this morning, you seemed genuinely shocked to hear about the accident. But when your stepfather arrived, he immediately started asking very specific questions about insurance coverage and legal authority. It struck me as unusual." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected where this was heading. Linda checked the door again, then moved closer to me. "Most spouses, when they first arrive after a traumatic accident, are focused entirely on their partner's condition. They want to know if their loved one is going to be okay, if there's pain, if they can hear them. Your stepfather's first questions were about medical decision-making authority and insurance claim procedures." A chill ran down my spine. "You think he knew about the accident before you called him?" "I think someone who truly believed they were the primary emergency contact would have been here hours ago," Linda said carefully. "This hospital is 20 minutes from his home address. We called Pamela's old number at 2:30 a.m. Even if it had connected, and even if she had immediately called him, he should have been here by 4 a.m. at the latest." I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. He turned his phone off, didn't he? He knew that if something happened to Mom, the hospital would eventually reach me through the secondary contact listing. He was counting on me being too far away to get here quickly. Linda's expression confirmed my suspicions. "There's something else. When I pulled your mother's insurance information, I noticed that the emergency contact form was updated just 2 weeks ago. The signature doesn't look like your mother's handwriting to me, but I'm not a handwriting expert." My blood ran cold. 2 weeks ago, Mom had been recovering from a minor surgery to remove her gallbladder. Derek had insisted on handling all her paperwork while she was recuperating. She'd been on pain medication and sleeping most of the time. It would have been incredibly easy for him to forge her signature on insurance documents. "Can I see that form?" I asked. Linda hesitated. "I shouldn't be showing you confidential paperwork, but given the circumstances." She pulled out a manila folder and opened it to reveal the emergency contact update form. The signature read Janet Chen Whitman, in handwriting that looked nothing like my mother's usual flowing script. It was angular, masculine, and clearly forged. I photographed the document with my phone before Linda could change her mind. "This is fraud," I whispered. "That would be a matter for legal authorities to determine," Linda said diplomatically. "But I will note in the medical records that there were discrepancies in the emergency contact documentation that raised concerns." 20 minutes later, Derek and Pamela returned with a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Derek introduced him as Robert Manning, the family attorney. My heart sank as I realized Derek was escalating this situation far beyond what I'd anticipated. "Ms. Chen," Manning said, extending his hand with professional courtesy, "I understand there's been some confusion about medical decision-making authority. I'm here to clarify the legal situation for everyone involved." I didn't shake his hand. "There's no confusion. My mother is unconscious, and as her daughter, I have every right to be involved in decisions about her care." Manning pulled out a folder of documents. "Actually, the situation is more complex than that. Oregon law gives primary medical decision-making authority to spouses, not adult children. Your stepfather has the legal right to make medical decisions for your mother, including decisions about who is allowed access to her medical information." Derek sat back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "Sophia, this isn't personal. This is just how the law works. You're not being excluded. You're simply not the legal decision maker." "But I can still visit her," I said, my voice rising with panic. "I can still be here while she recovers." Manning consulted his documents again. "Mr. Whitman has expressed concerns about the emotional stress of having too many visitors during this critical recovery period. Hospital policy allows the primary decision-maker to limit visitation in the best interests of the patient."
I felt the room spinning around me. Derek wasn't just trying to exclude me from medical decisions. He was trying to ban me from seeing my mother entirely. "You can't do this," I said, looking directly at Derek. "She would never want this. When she wakes up, the first person she's going to ask for is me." "Actually," Derek said with cold satisfaction, "I've been thinking about that. The doctors say she might have some memory issues from the head trauma. Confusion, difficulty recognizing people, problems with recent memories. It might be less stressful for her if we wait until she's more fully recovered before introducing complicated family dynamics." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Derek was planning to use Mom's potential memory issues to rewrite our entire relationship. If she was confused when she woke up, he could tell her anything. He could say I hadn't visited, that I'd been too busy with school to come see her, that I'd chosen my college life over her. By the time her memory cleared, if it ever did, he could have convinced her that I didn't care about her. That's when Mom's hand moved. It was subtle, just a slight flexing of her fingers, but I felt it because I was holding her hand. I looked at the monitors and saw her brain activity increasing. "She's waking up," I said. Dr. Martinez appeared as if summoned, checking Mom's responses and shining a light in her eyes. "Janet, can you hear me? You're in the hospital, but you're safe." Mom's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak but couldn't because of the breathing tube. Dr. Martinez explained that they were going to remove it and that she needed to stay calm. The next few minutes were a blur of medical activity as they extubated her and checked her responses. The first word Mom spoke was Sophia. Not Derek, not a question about where she was or what had happened. My name, clear and unmistakable. Derek's face went white. Pamela looked stricken. Manning shuffled his papers nervously. Mom's eyes found mine across the room, and she smiled weakly. "Baby, you came." Her voice was hoarse and barely audible, but the love in it was unmistakable. I squeezed her hand gently. "I was here the whole time, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Derek stepped forward quickly. "Janet, honey, you've been in an accident. You have a serious head injury. You might be confused about some things." Mom turned to look at him, and I saw confusion flicker across her face. Not confusion about who people were, but confusion about why Derek seemed to be suggesting she was confused. "I know who everyone is," she said clearly. "I know my daughter drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to be here. And I know you changed my emergency contacts without asking me." The room fell silent, except for the beeping of monitors. Manning cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitman, you've suffered a significant head trauma. Perhaps medical decisions should wait until you've had more time to recover." "My name," Mom said with surprising strength, "is Janet Chen, and the only decision I need to make right now is that I want my daughter here with me. Always." Derek's carefully constructed plan crumbled in that moment. All his legal maneuvering, all his manipulation, all his attempts to rewrite history meant nothing in the face of my mother's clear, conscious choice. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you some questions to assess your cognitive function. Can you tell me what year it is?" Mom answered every question perfectly. She knew the date, the president, her address, her social security number. When Dr. Martinez asked about her emergency contacts, Mom was explicit. "My daughter Sophia should always be called first. Always. If Derek changed that without my permission, then he committed fraud." Manning gathered his papers quickly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the legal situation. Obviously, if Mrs. Chen is competent to make her own decisions, then her preferences take priority." Derek made one last desperate attempt. "Janet, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of the accident, the medications." Mom turned to look at him with an expression I'd never seen before. It was disappointment mixed with something harder. "Derek, I remember everything. I remember you convincing me that Sophia needed space. I remember you scheduling trips during her breaks from school. I remember you telling me that loving her too much was hurting her chances at independence. And now, I remember you trying to cut her out of my medical emergency." She paused, gathering strength. "I also remember that 2 weeks ago, when I was recovering from surgery, you insisted on handling all my paperwork. I was too medicated to pay attention, but I never authorized you to change my emergency contacts." Derek's face cycled through several emotions before settling on resigned anger. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when she disappoints you again. Don't expect me to pick up the pieces when she decides her college friends are more important than family obligations." "The only person who has disappointed me," Mom said quietly, "is you." 3 months later, Mom filed for divorce. Derek fought it viciously, trying to claim that her head injury had impaired her judgment. But the hospital records showed her cognitive function had returned to normal within days of the accident. Linda testified about Derek's suspicious behavior and the forged emergency contact form. Dr. Martinez confirmed that Mom's decision-making capacity was completely intact. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the accident. Mom got the house, half the assets, and most importantly, her freedom to maintain whatever relationship she wanted with me. Derek moved to another state with Pamela, and we never heard from them again. Mom recovered fully from her injuries, though she still gets headaches sometimes. We're closer now than we've ever been, partly because we both understand how fragile family connections can be when someone is actively working to destroy them. I still have the screenshots of those 17 unanswered calls to Derek. Sometimes I look at them and remember how powerless I felt that morning, driving through the darkness, not knowing if my mother would survive, not understanding why the person who was supposed to love her most couldn't be bothered to answer his phone. But mostly, I think about the moment Mom opened her eyes and said my name. That moment when all of Derek's manipulation crumbled in the face of unconditional love. That moment when I learned that some bonds are too strong to be broken by paperwork or legal maneuvering or even forged signatures.
The emergency contact form in Mom's medical file now lists only one name, mine. This time, she filled it out herself, in her own handwriting, with me sitting beside her. Some people might call it overly cautious, but we call it learning from experience. Because when the people you trust with your emergency contacts become the emergency themselves, you learn that the most important safety net isn't made of legal documents or family titles. It's made of the people who will drive through the night, answer every call, and refuse to be erased from your life no matter how hard someone tries to write them out of your story. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I graduated from Portland State with honors. Mom was in the front row at the ceremony, beaming with pride, holding a bouquet of sunflowers that she'd driven 4 hours to deliver personally. As I walked across that stage, I thought about how different this moment could have been if Derek had succeeded in his plan to erase me from her life. The recovery process hadn't been easy for either of us. Beyond Mom's physical healing from the accident, we both had to work through the psychological damage that Derek's manipulation had caused. For months after the divorce, Mom struggled with guilt and self-doubt. She kept asking herself how she'd missed the signs, how she'd allowed someone to come between us, how she'd been so blind to his true nature. "I should have protected you," she said one evening as we sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Derek had once made me feel unwelcome. "I should have seen what he was doing." "You were being manipulated too," I reminded her. "He was an expert at making his control seem like care. His isolation tactics seem like guidance. You're not responsible for his deception." The truth was, Derek's manipulation had been sophisticated and gradual. He'd never overtly told Mom to choose between us. Instead, he'd planted seeds of doubt about my motives, my maturity, my commitment to the family. He'd framed my normal college student behavior as signs of selfishness or emotional manipulation. He'd convinced her that loving me less would somehow help me grow more. The emergency contact incident had been the culmination of a 4-year campaign to gradually diminish my role in Mom's life. If she hadn't woken up with her memory intact, if she hadn't immediately asked for me, his plan might have worked. He could have spent her recovery period rewriting our history, convincing her that I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. But we discovered that Derek's manipulation had extended far beyond just our family dynamics. During the divorce proceedings, Mom's attorney uncovered a pattern of financial control that we'd never noticed. Derek had been systematically moving money from Mom's personal accounts into joint accounts, then into investments that only he could access. He'd taken out a life insurance policy on Mom without her knowledge, listing himself as the sole beneficiary. Most disturbing of all, we found evidence that he'd been researching the legal requirements for having someone declared mentally incompetent. In his computer files, the attorney discovered saved articles about traumatic brain injuries affecting decision-making capacity and legal documents about guardianship procedures. Derek hadn't just been planning to exclude me from Mom's life, he'd been preparing to take complete control of her person and her assets. The realization that Mom's accident might have been the opportunity Derek was waiting for was chilling. If her head injury had been more severe, if she'd had lasting cognitive impairment, he would have been in position to have himself declared her guardian. With me effectively cut out of the picture through the emergency contact manipulation, he could have made decisions about her care, her finances, and her living situation without any family oversight. "He was planning to steal my entire life," Mom said when her attorney explained the full scope of what they'd discovered. "Not just my money or my house, but my autonomy, my relationships, my ability to make choices about my own existence." The attorney, a sharp woman named Victoria Santos, nodded grimly. This kind of systematic isolation and control is more common than people realize. Usually, we see it in cases involving elderly victims, but it can happen to anyone who becomes vulnerable through illness, accident, or major life changes. We learned that Derek had used similar tactics in his previous marriage. His first wife had died in a car accident 3 years before he met Mom, and during the divorce proceedings, we discovered that her adult children had been completely cut off from her in the months before her death. They'd tried to contest Derek's inheritance of her estate, claiming he'd manipulated her into changing her will, but they'd been unable to prove it in court. "He's done this before," I said, staring at the legal documents spread across Victoria's conference table. "We weren't his first victims." Victoria's investigation also revealed that Pamela had been more than just a supportive sister. She'd been Derek's accomplice, helping him research legal vulnerabilities and identify potential targets. The emergency contact change hadn't been a simple manipulation. It had been part of a calculated strategy developed over multiple relationships. "The pattern is clear," Victoria explained. "Derek targets women who have assets and adult children. He works to isolate them from their families, gain financial control, and position himself to inherit everything when they die. Your mother's accident accelerated his timeline. but he was prepared to implement the same plan he'd used before. The FBI got involved when Victoria presented evidence of potential fraud across multiple states. Derek and Pamela were arrested 6 months after Mom's divorce was finalized. They were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse in connection with Derek's first wife's case. My mother's case provided crucial evidence of their pattern of behavior. During the trial, 3 other women came forward with similar stories. Derek had targeted widows and divorcees in their 40s and 50s, women who had children and assets but were emotionally vulnerable after major life changes. His method was always the same: charm them into marriage, gradually isolate them from their families, gain control of their finances, and wait for an opportunity to eliminate any remaining obstacles to complete control. One of the women, Maria Santos, testified that Derek had tried to convince her to cut off contact with her son who lived across the country. When she refused, Derek had started a whisper campaign in their small town, spreading rumors that her son was only interested in her money and was manipulating her emotions to maintain access to her finances. Another woman, Carol Williams, discovered that Derek had been forging her signature on insurance documents and had changed her will without her knowledge. She'd only found out when she'd gone to update her beneficiaries after they'd gotten engaged, and discovered that Derek was already listed as her sole heir. He told me it was a romantic gesture, Carol testified. He said he'd taken care of the legal paperwork as a surprise, to show me how committed he was to our future together. I was so flattered that someone wanted to take care of the administrative details of our relationship. I didn't realize he was literally taking care to ensure he'd inherit everything I owned. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified about the emergency contact fraud and the systematic isolation tactics Derek had used to separate me from my mother. Mom testified about the forged insurance documents and the financial manipulation. Linda, the nurse who'd first called me, testified about Derek's suspicious behavior at the hospital. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Pamela received 8 years for her role in the conspiracy. The judge noted the particular cruelty of using medical emergencies and family relationships as weapons in their fraud scheme. The defendants didn't just steal money, Judge Patricia Morrison said during sentencing. They stole relationships, trust, and the fundamental human right to maintain connections with the people we love. They turned medical crises into opportunities for further manipulation, and they weaponized the legal system to separate families. This kind of systematic emotional and financial abuse strikes at the heart of what it means to be human. After the trial, Mom and I started speaking at conferences about financial abuse and family manipulation. We shared our story with social workers, nurses, and legal professionals who work with vulnerable adults. We wanted people to understand how sophisticated these predators can be, how they use love and concern as masks for control and exploitation. The hardest part to understand, Mom would tell audiences, is that Derek wasn't obviously evil. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely caring. He never raised his hand to me or overtly threatened me. Instead, he convinced me that his control was protection, that his isolation tactics were helping me grow, that his manipulation was guidance. We also discovered a network of other families who'd been targeted by similar predators. There was a whole underground support system of people who'd survived systematic manipulation and were working to help others recognize the warning signs. We learned about red flags we'd missed, tactics we hadn't recognized, and legal protections we hadn't known existed. One of the most important things we learned was that emergency contact manipulation is often one of the final steps in a predator's plan. By the time someone starts changing medical contacts and legal documents without permission, they're usually preparing for an endgame that involves complete control or elimination of their victim's autonomy. If someone tries to change your emergency contacts without your explicit consent, Mom would tell audiences, treat it as a red flag that they're preparing to cut you off from your support system entirely. This isn't about medical logistics. It's about ensuring that if something happens to you, they control who has access to information about your condition and who can advocate for your interests. 3 years after Derek's conviction, Mom remarried. Her new husband, Tom, is a retired teacher who encourages her relationship with me and actively works to include me in family decisions and celebrations. He gave me his phone number on the day they got engaged and told me to call him directly if I ever couldn't reach Mom. I know what you two went through, he said. I want you to know that my job is to support your relationship with your mother, not compete with it or control it. You should never have to worry about accessing her or being included in decisions about her well-being. Last month, Mom updated her emergency contacts again. This time, she